We're going to get started. Welcome everybody who is joining us in Zoom and who is joining us through Facebook. My name is Janelle Codiani. I'm the Executive Director of ātac Downtown Arts and Music, formerly known as Amazing Things Arts Center. If you are new to us, or you're just visiting for the first time, I encourage you to check out our website at atac160.org. You can see all of the shows that we have coming up, including a very, very exciting summer program, which is an outdoor movie series where we will be doing 4 weeks, 4 screenings of family-friendly nostalgic films. So I really, really hope you'll scoot over there and check that out. You're joining us tonight for Process, which is one of my favorite shows and programs to come out of this challenging time. Where we have a number of artists come and speak to us about some aspect of their process. And I find it to be a super true delight. The way that it works is our artist, Kelsey, will give you a presentation, a talk. She'll talk to you about what she does and some portion of that. There will be a visual component to that, and you get to ask questions afterwards. If you want, when it's question time, you can just unmute yourself and ask a question right into the Zoom. If that makes you feel a little nervous or you're just totally zoomed out, you can put your questions in the chat and I'll read them into the space. The same goes for folks in Facebook. You'll see me looking down at my phone here and there, not bored, just checking in on Facebook to see if there are any questions over there. And I will bring those into the space as well. And I guess that's it. That's all you need to know about how it works. A pretty casual talk, and we are really, really excited to have Kelsey with us tonight. And now I'm going to hand it over to you.
Hi, thanks for joining us. My name's Kelsey Leuenberger. I'm just gonna quickly share my screen with you guys. Okay, can everybody see that? Good. All right. So today I'm going to be talking about interdisciplinary acts in design and how to make your own interdisciplinary art practice. I'm a designer and educator in Boston, Massachusetts. And just a little bit about me. My background's very multifaceted. So I went to Bridgewater State. I got an undergrad degree in sociology, minoring in global social justice and art history, with additional minors in communication and Middle East studies. And then I went on to Parsons School of Design to get my MFA in design and technology. And a lot of my work deals with using technology to modernize cultural traditions and rituals. So sort of taking cultural events and artifacts and recreating them in a way that makes sense for right now. Yeah, so let's just start off with what are interdisciplinary acts. So interdisciplinary acts are the exploration of an idea through the lens of multiple disciplines, histories, cultures, creative mediums, to achieve a desired outcome. So what this means is independently researching different topics, different things that interest you, and sort of finding out what is shared between them, what is different about them, and combining them to create new and innovative ideas. So what are the things that can be shared and combined in interdisciplinary acts? Social values, ideologies, and cultures. In my work, I'm half Turkish, half German American, and so a lot of the time my work combines elements of both cultures to create artwork that sort of speaks to people from both places. It can also be technological processes or making processes. So taking different mediums that don't normally go together, like coating in ceramics or something like that, and creating a completely new sort of medium out of that. And the third thing is research frameworks. So different disciplines that you're researching are going to have different standards for, how you collect data, how you interpret data, things like that. And so when you're doing your research, you're going to want to sort of ask experts and professionals in those different disciplines to see sort of what the standards are and how you can communicate to people with different skill sets. So I'll be sort of talking about two different things: discipline, which I've already said a couple times, and form. So discipline acts as the framework of an idea, and form acts as the mode of creation, bringing that idea into physicality. So what that means is for design, it means think research. It means, what topics and ideas and narratives are you interested in talking about and expressing in your artwork? What experts do you need to contact? From what perspective are you approaching these things? And then form is really transferring an idea from your head to an audience. So what mediums do you want to use? Who are you collaborating with? What do you want to make, really? So an example of combining disciplines to create an interdisciplinary concept is this work right here. It's from the MIT Media Lab, their mediative matter group, and it's called the Silk Pavilion. So what the idea behind this project was taking digital and biological fabrication and seeing if they could use those two things to create architectural structures. And so in order to sort of make this piece of artwork, what they did was they built an outer structure and then had silkworms sort of follow that structure to create a silk architectural structure, basically. And so in order to find natural processes to manipulate to create these structures, they really had to research ecology, biology, digital fabrication like 3D printing, laser cutting, things like that, and just architectural principles in general to create this work. And so these ideas, the more disciplines you add and the more sort of bridges you can build to different disciplines, the more complex your idea is going to be, the more innovative your idea is going to be, and the more you're gonna sort of shock an audience, I guess, or teach them something that they didn't even expect to learn. And then an example of combining forms to create an interdisciplinary solution. So a lot of design work and artwork, it solves a problem. This is Kengo Kuma's bamboo rings, and the question that he asked was, how do we build earthquake-proof architecture? And after doing lots of research and prototypes, what they figured out was that they could combine bamboo and fiberglass to create these structures that were both flexible like bamboo, but strong like fiberglass. And so what they were doing was they were combining different materials and different mediums and different processes to create a completely new way to look at a problem and a completely new material, essentially. So I don't know if anybody has any questions based on what I've just said or anything I need to clarify before I move on to talk about sort of how I approach this in my work. Any questions? Okay. All right, so I will move on to talk about my work. So what I'm gonna do now is sort of compare my undergraduate thesis to my graduate thesis. So my undergraduate thesis was titled Modern Transformations of the Turkish Headscarf, an exploration of the political meaning, the socioeconomic impact, the cultural influence, and the art and craft of the hijab. So by the length of that title, you can tell that I was researching a lot of different things and trying to touch on a bunch of different areas at once. And at this point, I was trying to finish a sociology capstone and an art capstone. but I was only really doing photography up until this point. I didn't really know what the design process was. I just knew that I wanted to get into design. And so basically what I did was I started with what I know. So what I knew was sociology, and I started researching Turkish political history. And I eventually began to focus on the hijab ban in Turkey. And what that was after World War I, the government basically banned wearing the hijab in public spheres. And so this was supposed to be sort of a feminist act, but in reality, it sort of had the opposite impact because women were no longer allowed to wear the hijab in any public jobs. So they couldn't, go teach or be in parliament wearing a hijab, which kept a lot of women from those positions. And so basically after that, I wrote my sociology capstone, finished my research paper, and then I knew that I wanted to apply to grad school for design. And so I took this idea and I tried to make as many different pieces of art based off this one idea. And that's what I did until I came up with something that I really liked and I stuck with, and I made it sort of the center of my capstone. So the first sort of experiment that I did was this public art installation at Bridgewater State, and it's sort of a modernized geometric Islamic carpet in the form of a crosswalk. So this, again, I had no experience doing like this medium. And so really what I was trying to do was teach myself how to be a designer, teach myself all these different mediums by doing sort of one project after another based off one idea. And later I'd realize that I was prototyping, which is part of the design process, a really important, probably one of the most important parts of the design process. So this was the first thing that I did. And then I started, doing more little sort of graffiti art. I started looking at digital fabrication and laser cutting and just trying to learn the technology. I wasn't that good at it yet. I just, was making patterns and researching textile history in Turkey and Islamic artwork and all, like anything about, Turkey and culture that I could use to create artwork from. Again, more laser cuts, some laser cuts on wood. So I was trying different materials. And I did a few light installations just to figure out the technology and, get used to projection. So eventually, after lots of trial and error, I decided upon my final concept for my art capstone, and I decided to create 9 hijab designs based off the interior architecture of 9 different mosques in Turkey. And so, again, when I submitted the idea for this capstone, I had no idea how to use Adobe Creative Cloud, nothing. So an interdisciplinary art practice is really just about teaching yourself how to do things and learning through making. Yeah, so the top rows are the designs that I made, and then the bottom rows are the interior architecture. And this was the final textile that I created based off those patterns. Yeah, so basically what I learned from this was taking an interdisciplinary idea that ties from politics and art history and all these different things, and then just making as much stuff about it really as I can until I come up with an idea that I think is worth pursuing and sort of rounding out and perfecting and collaborating with other people about. So to compare that to my graduate thesis, so this was done 2 years later. And it was again on a subject that I had no idea anything about. And I really just taught myself how to do things as I was going. So the concept of this project called the Sugar Sepulchre, it's a sustainable burial ritual that reconsiders our relationship to decomposition and rebirth and reestablishes the importance of community in the mourning process. So it's basically a sustainable burial ritual that includes community members in labor, in caring, and in sustaining the burial garden that I've created. And it's for people who don't prescribe to any specific religion or spirituality. And it returns the human body back into the earth using natural cycles. And again, so this project is obviously very different than the first one that I did. So a lot of my projects in grad school were just, saying, oh, you know what, I want to learn more about this. I'm going to experiment with this, this idea, this discipline. I'm going to go talk to experts in this discipline. And, I might try some different mediums and see what I like, because it was a time for me to just experiment and sort of broaden my, my practice. And this ritual that I created was based off of the legend of the mellified man. So this is a pretty weird legend, I guess, from the Middle East. And what it is basically that allegedly in some communities, an elderly person who was near death would volunteer to consume honey until they passed away. And they would consume this honey, basically starting the preservation process of their body before they died, because honey kills bacteria and has lots of sugar in it, so it's a natural preservative. And then once they passed away, they would be buried in a sarcophagus that was filled with honey and then buried for about 200 years. And then after they were buried for 200 years, they'd be dug up and people would eat the body. So kind of strange, I know, but that's why I thought it was interesting. And so even though this is a legend, there are certain parts of it that are based in fact. So this photo right here is from an archaeological site in Georgia, and they found funerary objects and food that was preserved in honey. So in the Middle East, they did use honey as a preservative for funerary objects, even if they didn't go as far as the mellified man. And Herodotus noted that the ancient Assyrians embalmed their dead in honey, and it's said that Alexander the Great was apparently immersed in a golden sarcophagus brimming with honey. So there are lots of different references throughout history that talk about this legend. And the ritual that I made based off this was that initially the body of the deceased is cremated using human composting, which is a sustainable cremation process that turns the human body into fertile soil for planting. And so after the body is turned into soil, it can be used to plant a pollinator garden full of plants that bees can pollinate and then use to make honey. And here you can see the whole setup. So in the center is the beehive. There's some sort of engraved paneling, and then the garden plot for the composted remains. And then here you can see the diagram for the beehive. So there's a stand, and then the hive body, which is where the queen lives and the bees live. And then they go upward into the glass mason jars that are attached to the top of the hive here. And the bees basically go up there, they make honey, and then you can screw off the mason jars to harvest it. And this method of harvesting doesn't hurt the bees at all and is sustainable in that way. And then they can take the ritual a step further and consume the honey that is made from this process. So again, I've taken a cultural ritual and modernized it using different disciplines like ecology, biology, beekeeping, farming, all those different things, sustainable burials and funerary practices. And so my process for this started with sort of just writing down all the things that I was interested in. I was interested in grief and comfort, community building, secularism, sustainability, decomposition, rebirth, and then what all these sort of have in common is burial rituals. And as part of my research, I looked at precedents, which are just looking at other artists and other creatives who have done work in the same areas that you're interested in. This is a project on the left here by Sam Colton, and it's a cemetery speculative design. So it's not real yet, just a plan for it. But it would basically, you would bury the body in a blue shroud, and then the dyes, the sustainable dyes from that shroud would eventually bleach the sort of surrounding greenery blue. And it was supposed to be a reminder of death and the impact of climate change, and specifically how unsustainable funerary practices are. And on the right here, we have a project by Jay Rimley, and it's a mushroom suit that you can be buried in, and the mushrooms will decompose your body after you've passed away. And then I looked at, other examples of the mellified man. The Dervish House is a book where the main character comes across the legend of the mellified man. And I looked at ancient honey traditions in Turkey. This is deli ball, which is a hallucinogenic honey that's made in Turkey. Bees in the mountain will basically pollinate a very specific kind of rhododendron, and then it creates hallucinogenic honey, which is cool. You can buy it if you want to try it. I haven't, and I don't know if I recommend it, but if you want to, you can. And then again, human composting, so turning the body into soil. And I also did a lot of prototyping. So I was 3D printing, laser cutting, doing web design, all sorts of stuff, designing different rituals that weren't burial processes necessarily, but had to do with grief and comfort and things like that. And on the left is my first prototype. You can see, like, this is the first sort of beehive that I created with urban beekeepers in New York City. And then eventually, as I got better at understanding how a hive works, it could be simplified to the right design here. Yeah, so I guess in both projects, I sort of followed the same process, even though initially I had no idea that I was following a process at all. So, you're choosing all these different disciplines that don't necessarily seem to connect, finding why they connect, and then sort of prototyping ideas based off of the connections that you find, and the forms that inspire you, and hopefully creating something that's innovative that people haven't seen before. And then, so how to generate and execute interdisciplinary concepts. So these are kind of like the 5 tips that I used to help me sort of find what disciplines I want to study. The first rule is break the algorithm. So what this means is, taking a class outside of your department, reading a book on something you've never read before. And one of my favorite things to do, you can do this in a museum or a library, but just, walk in, pick a direction, and just sort of like walk until you see something that sparks your eye. It's a great way to generate new ideas and find out different things that you didn't even know existed, things that were options to make art about. The second is do your research, read articles, books, podcasts, YouTube videos, anything that you can, any information you can, really. The third is contact professionals and experts in the disciplines you're investigating, like I did with the urban beekeepers and funerary experts and all of that. If you're entering a discipline that you don't know that much about, you can catch up a lot quicker if you just go right to the source, right to the people who know what they're doing. That is like the biggest tip that you can do. And they're usually very excited and eager to help you and to teach people who wouldn't normally be interested in what they're doing about all the work that they do. The fourth is to find organizations, clubs, and workshops, online lectures like this that expose you to people who know something you don't really. And this will give you the ability to build a creative community. So you'll find other artists to collaborate with. You'll start talking to them about one subject, and then they'll introduce you to another one. And it's just a great way to build an interdisciplinary practice. And 5 is a very big tip. So your weakness is, I should say someone else's strength, or vice versa. So when you're building a creative community, especially in grad school, this was the case. I'd ask somebody for help with coding, and then they'd ask me for help with photography or something like that. So, the more friends, more collaborators you have, you're going to be able to fill each other's gaps and sort of bring all of your work up to a higher level by collaborating, by exposing each other to new information. And then what are the benefits of interdisciplinary art practice? So your work's going to be more well-rounded. It's going to diversify your audience. The more topics you do your work on, the more people are going to relate to it. The more cultures it will relate to, things like that. You'll broaden your community. Again, you'll have more collaborators. You'll have more people to make art with. And that's never a bad thing. You'll generate ideas faster, and you're gonna generate innovative ideas faster. The best way to do that is, again, just start combining things that aren't often combined, don't make sense to combine. You'll come up with a new perspective on things almost immediately. You're gonna solve problems more efficiently. If you're problem solving and you have a diverse audience, a diverse people testing your solutions, a diverse community of people collaborating with you, the more effective your problem solving is going to be. And then lastly, you're just going to build a practice that constantly refreshes itself in terms of ideation and collaboration and knowledge. So there's really very few downsides to an interdisciplinary practice. You're going to meet a lot of great people. You're going to learn a lot of things you didn't even know you could learn, and you're going to make a lot of art that you really didn't think you were capable of making. Yeah, so that's all I have on this. If anybody has any questions or wants me to dive deeper into anything, then yeah, I'm excited to do that.
I'm just going to come on to remind everybody that you can just unmute yourself and ask questions, or you can ask questions into the chat as well. And I'll start us off. I'll start us off with a question. I have a technical question about how the honey goes up into that, into the jar up top. How are they making honey in the absence of a comb? Or
yeah. So basically, bees will make honey anywhere that they can escape to. So the reason that they make them in the sort of comb, I forget what they're called, is it is it a cone? But
comb, yeah, like it's hexagonal, yeah.
Yeah. So they still make them in the combs, but the sort of sheet shelves that are usually in a beehive, the only reason they use those is because that's the only room they have to make them. So in this hive, it's basically just a big box, and the queen lives there and the bees live there. And then there's a hole that connects the lower box to the mason jar. And so the bees are just gonna naturally go in there because they're looking for more space, and that's where they're gonna make the honey. The only caveat there is you have to be careful about how much extra space you have in the lower box, because they're gonna make honey wherever they can. But it's a great way to harvest honey because it doesn't kill any of the bees. You don't have to use smoke or anything like that. You just unscrew the mason jar and you leave it on top of the hive for a bit. The bees will naturally just sort of abandon the honey and go back to doing what they do. And it's, you can really easily make this kind of hive yourself. I did it in my garage with help from my dad. So yeah, I definitely recommend it.
That is so interesting. The only thing similar to that I've seen are the hives that have like where they basically it like comes out like a faucet, where it like cracks those combs and then everything comes out, and that doesn't disturb the bees as well. But also they're making the honey into this jar, like directly into the jar, and it's upside down. This is a very technical question. Like how do you make sure that it doesn't spill? Like how is it actually working?
Well, most of it's like pretty thick at that point, so you just kind of have to be careful. But the whole like the lid as well as the jar can unscrew or come up out of it depending on how you design it. Mine, I just unscrewed it and like flipped it over quick, but depending on how you do it, some people have the lid there too.
That is so interesting. I think that maybe the settings on this Zoom are that you can't unmute yourself unless I ask you to unmute. So if anybody is also having any issues there, I will just unmute you for yourself. So if anybody has questions, go ahead.
Yeah, I got a question. Hey, what's going on? Kelsey, great job. We actually went to the same university together for our undergrad studies, but great presentation first and foremost. I did have a question for future projects. Since we're in the advent of all this blockchain and cryptocurrency stuff, have you considered projects, maybe doing any projects on NFTs or producing any digital work to be able to sell as an NFT?
So I personally haven't. I know a lot of people who have, because it's a really interesting avenue to go into. But I'd have to do a lot of research on it for me to understand it. But I guess, that's part of interdisciplinary practice. So if I become interested in it or that's really like the route that everything's going in, which it seems to be, I'm sure eventually I'll have to incorporate it into a piece of work that I do. But yeah.
That's awesome. I'm in the Boston area, volunteer for the Boston Blockchain Association. There's a lot of talented individuals here who are doing that kind of stuff. And, I'm more than happy to get you connected with those people and maybe make something happen.
That'd be great. Yeah.
We have a question in the chat that I'll read in. CK says, great presentation, thank you. What would you say is the most challenging part of the entire design process, the beginning, middle, or the end? And can you expand on that?
Honestly, the hardest thing for me is to sort of finalize my idea. A lot of the projects, so when you're doing interdisciplinary work, it's not just a discipline that's interdisciplinary, right? Like you have the option of really any medium that you want, especially in the program that I was in. So like I wasn't in a ceramics major or something like that, right? It was just like you have an idea, figure out how to make it, you're on your own with that pretty much, you know what I mean? And so you'd start researching things and then you'd be like, oh, like I could make a documentary about this. I mean, I actually did that at one point. I have a project called Tahir's Table, which is, it's basically just two people enjoying a piece of baklava and talking about the culture that they are from. And initially I was going to do a documentary, I was going to do this. And, you know, some of these prototypes end up taking a really long time. And then you're like, oh, I'm not going to do this. Like, this is ridiculous. What am I getting myself into? Or it's not like the piece of the puzzle that you want to talk about, I guess. Like for me in that project, I was trying to just go to New York City and sort of find Turkish culture and sort of expose myself to Turkish culture. And so initially I was like, I'm just going to document everything that I find. And then eventually I was like, you know, actually the thing that's important to me is these cultural conversations. And so I deviated and I just did a project where I was talking to people and none of it was documented. I was just sitting across from somebody talking about where they're from. And it turned out to be way more beneficial for everybody involved. So I think the hard thing is sort of going with your gut. And after spending like a while on one idea, being like, I guess it's time to move on from this and try something else.
I have a question, my own question. My BFA was also in an interdisciplinary major. I graduated from the Studio for Interrelated Media, which is like similar concept based. And so it was a lot of what you're talking about, really great. You're also surrounded by people who are doing all and learning all different kinds of things, you know, all the time. And something, however, that I always felt, I feel in my own creative practice, I definitely, I don't think inadequate is too strong. It's too strong of a word. But when I look at these other artists that have chosen a medium and they've chosen a vehicle and they get to be experts, and I think about that a lot, you know, where I think like, you know, at this point, I feel like I'm more an expert in figuring out what to do, but I don't have an expertise in any particular medium. You know, I'm better at some, right? And I'm wondering if you interact with that at all in your own practice of like switching from things to things, even talking about, you know, spending a lot of time on a prototype, or, you know, you get an idea and you're like, oh, I'm going to execute it like this. And you're like, this material is obnoxious to work with, or like, I just don't like it. And so twofold. One, just have you interacted with that in an interdisciplinary practice? And do you have a process for allowing yourself to let go of something that isn't working? And what does that look like?
So first off, yes, 100% I've dealt with that. And I know what you mean. I think the way that I've grappled with it is that over time, things that you're naturally more interested in, you'll naturally sort of gain more expertise in. So like, for example, for me, it's photography. And you know, am I a studio photographer? No. But can I use it in any project and feel like confident that it's good? Yeah. So I think the way that I grapple with it and sort of make myself feel better about being a generalist is that, you know, there are some things that I can do well just because over time I was interested in it the longest. But I think when you're working on a project, the best way to overcome that is to collaborate with somebody or ask somebody if you're on the right track. You know, this is my second prototype of the sugar sepulcher. And I guarantee you that some of the urban beekeepers I was talking to would look at that beehive and be like, what is she doing? You know, they've been doing it their whole lives. Their fathers did it. And so I think it's just kind of being patient with yourself and knowing that if you were going to really take it into like a really serious avenue, that you would have to collaborate with people in order to execute it really well. And I think that makes a lot of people feel sort of inadequate, like you said, but in another way, I mean, I think everybody sort of has to do it no matter what. And I think the only way that you really push the boundary of anything is to sort of have an idea that's so big that you need other people to finish it with you, you know? So I don't think it's something to feel bad about, even though I totally relate to feeling bad about it, because I do all the time, you know? People in my program, we were told like you'd have to make, you know, a couple different resumes to get a job and things like that, you know? So it's like, how do you, trying to like define your own practice becomes difficult. But I think over time, you're gonna develop specializations even if you didn't mean to. You know, you'll find yourself, you know, 10 years down the line and be like, oh, wow, like I actually did get pretty good at that. Or you'll get into a room with people and you'll think you're just a complete generalist and you'll be like, oh, wait, I actually maybe know a lot about it. Yeah, sorry, that was kind of a long answer.
No, it's totally great. It's totally great. And I think relating to that, and like at this point, you know, like I've been in practice for over 20 years and I can see that where I'm like, oh no, I totally know how to do this whole thing. You know,
Yeah.
I can answer questions on it, which is interesting. But the other thing, I think ownership of being a generalist versus a specialist, which our culture, I think, values more. We like value masters. And all of our, you know, capitalistic and educational goals like really are geared toward that. But owning the fact that you, like, when I got to the point where I was like, oh, I'm never going to be like that. I'm never going to be the person that knows everything about a thing. It really broke me open to being so much more comfortable in relying on other people, because like I don't want to spend that time learning everything about it, but somebody else does and they are psyched about that thing that they know, and they will more than happily tell you everything you need to know to do your like part of it.
For sure.
You know, so there's like a freedom in that. We have a question in the chat about any of your next projects that we can look out for, and anywhere where we can share a follow. Typically at the end, I will ask where people can find you, but you can offer that now if you want.
Yeah, I have an Instagram, just my name, Kelsey Leuenberger, and I have a website, kelseyleuenberger.com. You can see behind me the beginnings of the project I'm working on, which is a digitally fabricated dress. I'm also doing a lot of landscape design. After doing my thesis, I've gotten more into that. Definitely far from an expert on that though, so we'll see how that goes. But yeah, so you can check out those for any updates on my work. But yeah.
I told you that I would have all the questions and I will tell our audience as well, I will always just ask a million questions. So please chime in either just by an unmute if you can, or putting it in the chat. I have my eyes on it. My other secondary question to the first one I asked about knowing when to let go of something.
Right. Sorry. Yeah, so I think, I know this is kind of like maybe a cop-out answer, but it really is going with your gut. And I think it's okay, sort of like what you said with just sort of accepting you're a generalist. Like sometimes you just have to accept that this isn't the medium for you. And I think the more effort you put into it, the more time you put into it, the less likely you're going to be to completely sort of let go of it. But I guess the thing that I do to make sure that my gut is right is that I really think about what is the most important thing I'm trying to say. So like, for example, the Tahir's Table project, I was basically in classes, you know, trying to do this documentary. Nothing was working. Like my technique wise, my video was all over the place. I was shooting on an iPhone. It was like, I I couldn't get into certain parts of New York City in time to like shoot it. It was my first time ever shooting a documentary, right? So I had no idea what I was doing. And I was like, maybe this documentary is going to be like a different idea. And I realized like, maybe there's a simpler way to say what I'm trying to say. And for me, I found that often I don't want to say the simpler thing is always best, but if you revisit sort of what your intentions are, it's often a really simple answer. And I think that you sort of have to just not be sentimental over your ideas. I think that's the biggest thing.
That's really great and really, really helpful. There's another question in the chat. It says, this is from Jay. I love that you touch on collaboration as a way to bring something larger than life to fruition. What skills or attributes would help you realize a dream project of yours?
What skills and attributes? So is that what skills and attributes in a collaborator or in?
Yes. Yeah.
So fun fact, Jay went to school with me, and we're interested in a lot of the same things. And so I think that's the biggest thing, is finding somebody who one approaches things from sort of a similar perspective as you, or at least has the same values as you. Like they can be really good at different mediums. They can have completely different ideas, but I think different designers and different artists have different values when it comes to what they're making. So I think finding collaborators that have the same values as you is probably the most important thing. And then sort of building from there, because I think sort of, I don't know, like having chemistry with a collaborator, I guess, usually comes from shared values more than it comes from shared ideas, because I've had a lot of collaborators who like are good at such completely different things than I am, and we work really well together. And the projects are more interesting. We're teaching each other stuff like the entire time, but like what we want out of the project, how we want to feel when we're working, all those things are similar. So that's what I'd say.
Thanks for answering that.
Yeah.
I am going to use this voice, which sounds like I'm going to wrap it up, but that's what always draws out the rest of the questions if anybody has them. This was really, really wonderful. It's an incredible delight to hear about your process and the ways that you approach creativity and collaboration are really, really interesting to me personally, and it was really informative. I liked your tips as well, and I'm going to hold on to those. And I think what you just said about shared values really hits home, especially in a time where we are being collectively called to be much more vocal about what our values are, and kind of pre-negotiate that with people and make sure that we're in alignment, and for equity and for justice, for all of those reasons as well. And I think that just rings very true and hits home for just that pre-negotiation process of like, what are we trying to achieve together and who's included, and how we want to respect literally the earth, like as we get something together. So it's really great to think about that in the context of creating. If anybody was so too shy to ask you a question in this, or if somebody's watching this after the fact via Facebook, and they want to reach out to you, they can find you on your Instagram and your web page. Can you say those things again?
Yeah, my Instagram is at Kelsey Leuenberger, and my website is kelseyleuenberger.com.
Great. And we have one more comment in the chat. I feel the same way when it comes to being interested in various things in life, especially learning new skills and showcasing our talents. This was really, really wonderful. Thank you so much for taking the time to share with us. And it was a total pleasure. For those of you who want to share this after the fact, it'll be up on our Facebook page at ātac 160, and also it'll be up on our website as well, which is ātac160.org. Please go in there and see about the other process talks we have had. And if you yourself are a creator and you're interested, please reach out to us. Thank you so much. And I'm going to do a quick goodbye on the Zoom, the quick Zoom goodbye. Thank you for being here.